understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
Good morning. It is the podcast. John is giggling over here, but he is looking almost transcendental because he has been at a gig in the last 24 hours that has changed his life.
Well, it wasn't just any old gig. I went to see Nick Cave last night and the Bad Seeds.
And the Bad Seeds.
And the
so
Bad
the
Seeds.
the whole gang.
The whole shebang. And, you know, I go to a fair few gigs.
Yeah.
But this was by far one of the best gigs I've been at in many, many years. It was spiritual. Like it really was. It was, and he was like a
the
dark
Tin White Duke.
yeah, but he was like a dark preacher man.
Yeah,
and he had the audience in his hand. It was absolutely brilliant. I went with a few lads and they all loved it. And, you know, highlights were Red Right Hand, Tupelo, you know, the song Tupelo. And it's about Elvis. Tupelo is where Elvis Presley was born. And he starts the song with saying, I love Elvis. I really love Elvis. And he was born in this town called Tupelo on the night of the Tupelo storm, where no birds flew and no fish swam.
Preacher man.
Bam! And we were into it. And it was just unbelievable, you know?
Yeah.
And then the very last song was, you know, one of my favorite songs, and everybody's favorite song, Into My Arms.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But he played it on his own, just with the piano. And everyone sang along, but they weren't banging it out. They sang it. And at the end, you know, because he's the big screens as well, there was tears rolling down his face.
Well, I mean, Nick Cave he's gone through so much personal tragedy.
Yeah.
Two sons.
Two sons died, yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, fascinatingly, I saw Nick Cave, believe it or not, in the Abbey, John. In the Abbey.
Oh.
About 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah.
A stripped back, tiny gig. John Reynolds, my friend who founded Electric Picnic,
Yes,
who
yeah.
also sadly died not that long ago, had organised. So Nick Cave was playing the second night, a massive gig in the Royal Hospital, Kilmainham, the Museum of Modern Art, the Royal Hospital, big gig. But John asked him to do a small gig.
Jesus.
Just Nick Cave on his own with a grand piano.
Wow.
And it was amazing. But what was even more fascinating is Cillian Murphy, a guy who's obviously very, very shy, doesn't go out very much, always stays away from the limelight.
Yeah.
Walks in, and of course, Nick Cave did the theme for Peaky Blinders.
Right.
And you could just see Nick Cave taking a double take and, oh shit, your man's in the room. But anyway, John, though that sounds really good.
Great.
So anyway, and we're also just back from Kilconomics, where we had a fantastic time.
Another great gig.
Another great gig, yeah. Another great 70 gigs.
Well, ours, of course.
The standout gig. But that was all good too. Anyway, John, this podcast today, we're going to have a little hit on America because everyone's still digesting what the hell happened there.
Yes, we've got indigestion actually with this.
We're going to go to the other big story internationally, which is the collapse of the German government.
Yes.
What it means for the world and for us. Because although America is still the most consequential economy and political force in the world, for us in Europe, Germany is still very much key. And then what we're going to do is, I'm just talking to you as the listener. The Irish election is coming up. I haven't got my head around the manifestos yet. I haven't had time to think about it yet. But what we will do over the course of the next couple of weeks is we'll go through the manifestos and see who's got a good manifesto on housing, on health, on, you know...
Or if anyone has a good manifesto.
Or if they're all the same.
Yeah.
Or if they're all the same. The Irish election is on Friday fortnight. Extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's kind of mad, isn't it? You're having what I love about Ireland is the snap election is Friday fortnight. In Germany, the snap election is in February.
Yes. Well, I was going to say snap.
Well, I know. It's very
slow
German.
snap.
Yeah. If you're having a snap election, the snap election is in February. It has to be planned. It's Germany, for God's sake. It has to be planned.
So let's start with America. So what's your take now that you've...
Of course, Kilconomics was just wall to wall. It was basically Trump wallpaper, right? Because it was the massive story, and it was fascinating to get people's views from all over the world, Americans, but Latin Americans, you know, people from Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Africans giving their views of the whole things, Asians giving their views of the whole things. So it was America, what's it going to do? How it's going to change the world. What we have seen since then and over the last couple of days is the emergence of the complexion of the Trump cabinet.
Yes.
And that Trump cabinet looks as if it is going to do what it said on the tin. It is a MAGA, full-on MAGA cabinet.
Yeah.
I see that Michael O'Leary was applying for the Elon Musk job in Ireland the other day. Michael O'Leary came out and had a go at teachers at a Fine Gael rally.
Yes, he did.
But what Trump has done is he's getting Elon Musk in there to cut bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Now, I would say the most insecure place in the world right now is to be a middle-ranking FBI officer in the United States.
Yeah.
Because they're going to come after the FBI. They're going to come after the Department of this, that, and the other. And there will be enormous layoffs in America.
Well, it's this Schedule F thing that we were talking about before. If you don't sign up, pledge allegiance to the president, you're out.
And they want to take $2 trillion off the budget.
Yeah.
But off state spending. So what they want to do is they want to cut state spending, but then in a massive big tax break, increase the budget deficit.
Yeah.
But it is an ideological and a political Trump quake over there. It's really different.
And one of the other ones that I find really worrying is your man Mike Huckabee from Arizona. Sarah Huckabee Sanders' dad is now the ambassador.
And he doesn't even recognize
Israel.
the West Bank. He doesn't think, he says there is no occupation.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've gone full BB.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
We are in for a political, social, economic, military, geostrategic, geopolitical sea change over the course of the next while.
And we need to be really careful here, just a little aside, we need to be really careful here on who is elected, because I think one of the considerations is how or who's going to be best placed to play this game and get the best out of it, out of America for Ireland.
Basically, the idea, and we touched on it last week, the greening of the White House, the Shamrock, the Shillelagh, the Irish Americans, it's all over.
Yeah.
That's all over.
Yeah.
That central part of what I would call our emotional diplomacy, our legacy diplomacy. Look, we're all in this together. It's almost like the boys in the NYPD choir singing Galway Bay.
Yeah.
That used to be our approach to politics, to diplomacy. That's over now. That's over, and we have to be quite different. We'll come back to that later on, but I read a really fascinating piece in The Atlantic magazine this morning, which was comparing, and it's a really good piece. The piece basically says the HR-ification of the Democratic Party. And I think it's really good. It says the Democratic Party has turned into a large HR department. It opens with Kamala Harris and the Democrats sold themselves as the party of change, freedom, and not being weird. Many American voters instead saw them as priggish Stepford wiveies and condescending smarty pants. He goes on to make this point. Right? He says, like human resources, the Democrats are the party of norms, procedures, bureaucracies, rule following, language policing, and compliance. And the basic argument is, I have nothing against HR people, but I've always thought that they exist in a way to tell people what not to do. Right? These are the rules, these are the regulations. And although they masquerade themselves as being on the side of the workers, they're there to, in effect, do what the bosses want and create corporate strategies and company ideas.
You might be a little unfair there, but go
maybe
on
a little
anyway.
bit, but it's a good article. And what this guy is saying is basically, Trump and people around Trump famously hate being told what to do.
Yeah.
And HR departments exist just to do that, right? To tell you this is how we're going to do. And the article is really interesting because what it gets to the point of, and we kind of forget this, is that the American presidential election is a referendum and it's a beauty contest. What Trump appealed to was a sense of wildness and chaos and, dare I say it, kind of fun in one way. And what the Democrats were doing, they were the party of rules and compliance and good behavior. And it's very, very clear that the Americans reject that. Yeah. And I think I just thought the idea of framing it the party of HR, and it's interesting here as well, because we're going into an election and lots of politicians spend their time telling people how we ought to behave.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And they frame this as being, you ought to behave like this because this is for the good of humanity. But lots of people in elections just want to be allowed to do their own thing.
Well, this is it. I think we spoke on the live show about epochs and stuff. And I think one of the defining characteristics of this new epoch is a rejection of politics and politicians. And I think it's going to happen here as well. And perhaps Germany. You know, it is those career politicians are out.
HR people.
Yeah. Well,
let's just call them HR people.
Maybe it is.
No, but I like that idea because I remember years ago, and again, this is look, again, anybody who works in HR who listens to the show, this is not having to go at you, but I do remember being fired, right? And I remember
several times.
But I remember the role of HR was not to engage with the person who'd been fired.
Yeah.
Was not to actually understand the dilemmas. And I mean, when you get isolated in a company and when you have a target on your back, the HR actually do the job of the fucker who's firing you, right?
Yeah.
And they what they do is they intervene and they come with rules and regulations. And they give you your rights and your this, that, and the other. But they are ushering you out the door. They do.
But on the flip side, Mac, and I'm sticking up for my HR buddies, is that I worked in a big media organization that didn't have HR, and it was chaos, and it was not fun. It was not a good place to work.
Well, I've just telling you, I worked in a place which was HR'd up the yin yang, and what I noticed is when the individual worker, was faced with the overwhelming and terrifying power of the corporation and was on the wrong side, what the HR did then was they sugarcoated the corporation rather than understand, listen to, or even advocate for the individual.
That might be a part of that particular corporation as opposed to
could have
in
been,
general.
but it could have been. But I think I like the idea though.
Yeah.
That
You
have a party,
I get you.
party that is telling you how you should behave vis-a-vis a creature who is letting it all hang out.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good way of framing it. Because basically, the Office, one of the reasons why The Office was so good, because it was so toe-curlingly embarrassing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes,
the way in which The Office tried to change people's behaviors and tell people how to behave and all that sort of stuff. And in a way, elections can sometimes be seen through that framework. And our Irish election is coming up. And there is, particularly amongst the coalition parties, right? Actually, amongst all of them.
Yeah.
There is a default position to how you ought to behave, right? So the lefties, the extreme left are saying, we have to do this, we should do this, right? And their messaging is very much like, if you knew how much I knew about the world, you would do this.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Fianna Gaelers and Fianna Fáilers are all sort of, I see they were arguing with the Shinners the other day about their housing policy. And all they said to the Shinners is, the banks mightn't engage with you. And you're thinking, that just sounds like the HR department or the really bossy school teacher approach,
Yeah. Well,
anyway, let us talk about Deutschland, because the news that was buried under the Trump quake was the snap election in Germany.
Yeah, so tell me, give us a brief background on why this happened and why was it so shocking and sudden?
Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give you 3 pieces of headline data of profits from companies this week.
Okay.
These are profits of Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi, just to give you a sense of where the German economy is, right? Mercedes-Benz group net profits for the third quarter of 2024 fell by 54% compared to Q3 2023.
54%?
Right? For the first 9 months of this year, profits in Mercedes-Benz have declined by 31% compared to the same first 9 months of last year, right? That's Mercedes. BMW's Q3 2024 profits were 476 million euros, which sounds like a lot, compared to 2,931 million euros for the same quarter, a drop in profits of 83%.
Wow.
This is BMW, okay?
Wow.
Deliveries to China dropped by 13%, just to China alone, right? Audi, just to get the three big German car makers, first 3 quarters of 2024, their net profits fell by 45.8%.
That's incredible.
So the German car industry is in freefall, right? Now you're talking to a man who doesn't have a car, right?
Yeah.
So I cannot help them, okay, in any shape
go
or
buy one.
form, right? I might go buy one. But my point is, that is all we need to know about what's happening to the industrial muscle of Germany.
Yeah.
And it's against that type of background, that really sort of dramatic reversal of fortune, that we have to see this German snap election. And then I'll give you the runners and riders and who are they?
Yeah.
So the geezer who is tipped to be the next chancellor is the head of the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, and his name is Friedrich Merz. So the Christian Democratic Union, to give you a bit of background, this is the party of Konrad Adenauer, the party of Helmut Kohl, the party of Angela Merkel.
Right.
So it is the old Catholic centrist party. So after the Nazis, after the Second World War, basically you got 1945, the whole thing's collapsed. What are we going to do? The Americans said, look, we need to create and recreate old German institutions under leaderships of people who were not necessarily prominent Nazis. Now, that was kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
That was kind of hard to do. Think about the Nazis had killed so many of the opposition, right? So it was difficult to find people who had the credibility, but they found a number of them. And around the old Catholic centrist party in Germany, they created the CDU, which was the Christian Democratic Union.
Yeah.
It calls itself liberal conservative, right? That's the brand, okay? So it's Christian, it's traditional values, it is liberal, but it bleeds conservative, right?
Centrist dads.
Centrist dads, except Deutschland type, okay?
Yeah.
Centrist dads and mutties, right? But what they are, they have been very much located in Catholic areas of Germany, very much located in West Germany, in and around the Rhineland. And of course, they've got a sister party down in Bavaria that we'll talk about in a second, right? So they have been probably the permanent government of Germany in the same way as the Tories in England, when you strip it all back, are usually in power.
Yeah.
And then every now and then there's a Labour government, and then the Tories come back in.
Yeah.
The CDU are some...
It's like the Fianna Fáil of here.
Yeah, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. They're very like Fine Gael, I would say, right?
Right, okay.
Or Fine Gael fused with Fianna Fáil. But they are very much the dominant ballast in most German coalitions. They have had the two outstanding chancellors of the last 30 years in Helmut Kohl, who was the chancellor of reunification, and of course in Angela Merkel, who's a 3-time chancellor, and again was the chancellor during the crisis, the economic crisis, etc., and let in all the immigrants and changed Germany, all that sort of stuff, right? They are very much wedded to something called the Schuldenbremse. And the Schuldenbremse is the debt brake.
Right.
So this is something that Angela Merkel put into the constitution, which is that German governments cannot run structural deficits above 0.35% of GDP.
What does that mean?
So a structural deficit is when you take out, it's the either the surplus or deficit a government runs when you take out interest payments, right? So it's basically what they're doing.
Yeah.
How much taxes they get in, how much spending. What they say is you cannot run, which is phenomenal, a deficit more than 0.3.5% of GDP. So you have to, in effect, balance your budget. They refer to this in terms of schwarz null, which means black zero.
Right.
So their idea is you have to balance your budget all the time. Now, the reason the Germans came out with that was Merkel, she put that in place in 2009.
Yeah.
When the German debt to GDP ratio, which is your total debt to your total GDP, went from about 60% to 80% as a result of the global financial crisis. Now, so what Merkel said was, we are going to put in this brake that no government, and the reason I say government, because Germany is a federal state.
Yeah.
So the federal government raises its own taxes, each federation, right?
Yeah.
Each lander, okay. And A, they did this. Now, B, why did they do this? Because it means it's the most anti-economical thing. Because basically it says there is no business cycle.
Right.
Because usually what happens is, in good times,
There's
your
no
revenue...
business cycle.
So if you decide that you're going to have a balanced budget all the time,
Yeah.
you impute from that is there is no such thing as a business cycle. Because
Right.
your business cycle is what gives you tax revenues and tax losses. So if the economy is, remember we were joking in the podcast.
Yeah.
If the economy is up on its and everyone's spending and everything's good, that is a boom, right? That will generate a huge amount of excess tax revenue,
Yeah.
which the government will have. And then the idea is you keep that in the piggy bank, and then when the country goes into recession, which it always does, you spend that. It's called automatic stabilizers.
Right.
So you spend when you're in recession and you save when you're in a boom.
Okay.
Right? But you accept the idea that you have recessions and booms. The Germans, of course, with the debt brake, have said there is no such thing as that. But we just basically have to run perfectly balanced budgets all the time. Now,
Sounds like Gordon Brown's prudence.
But even Gordon Brown, Mickey Mouse, right? Okay, but because the Brits talk about prudence, the Germans actually do it. And in a very German way, they put it into their constitution.
Right.
So that, do you remember I told you a few years ago that one of the key democratic institutions in Germany is the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe.
Yes.
So that basically everybody can go to the ones who wear little red hats. Looks a little bit freaky because the other fellas wore the little red hats too. Anyway, the problem with that is that over the years, 2009 to now is a long time. Germany's population has expanded. They've taken in 1 or 2 million immigrants. I'm not too sure what the overall figure is, right? Their public sector and their public infrastructure has become profoundly degraded because they are wedded to this idea, right? Now, I know it's a sort of a trope or a meme or a shorthand, but there's two things in economics. There's rules versus discretion, right? German likes a rule.
Yeah.
So rule was given and they all signed up to it, right? So now what you have is the entire political landscape is handicapped by this rule.
Yeah.
So they can't do anything. So the big issue in the next electoral cycle is, will this guy, Friedrich Merz of the CDU, be the guy who smashes Angela Merkel's debt brake?
So what you're saying then is that if they're not spending, or if they're spending caps, that they haven't been investing in new innovation, or in actual fact, I was speaking to a couple of young students down in Kilconomics this weekend. I think there were 2 sisters, Emma and Ruth. And Emma spent time in a college in southwest Germany. I can't remember exactly where. And she was saying that over 60% of trains run 20 minutes late in Germany, which is unheard of.
But so German public infrastructure has been profoundly degraded, right? So just hold that thought and then put together the 3 other big issues that Germany's been affected by. The first is their economic model was based entirely on cheap energy from Russia.
Yes.
That collapsed after the Ukraine war, right? Number 1. Number 2, part of their economic model was that exporting of consumer goods to China.
Yes.
Over time, it was assumed the Chinese would eventually take the German technology, rob it, and make better cars, which they have done.
Absolutely.
So as you saw, though, from those reports from BMW, their exports to China are collapsing.
Yeah.
Because the Chinese now have what the Germans had, and they're doing it cheaper and better. So eventually, you have a massive part of your business model goes. So your cheap energy goes, your reasonably open market in China goes, and then the final subsidy Germans were getting was the military subsidy, where the Americans were paying for their defense, right?
Yes.
And only by the Americans paying for their defense could they possibly hit that budget target and increase their defense budget, right? Now the Americans said, particularly Trump now said, we're not going to pay for it. So the Germans will have to increase their defense budget. Why? Because by February, by the time of this snap election, the war in Ukraine could be over and the Russians could have won it.
Yeah.
And you know what that means?
Yeah.
That means that everybody in Central Europe begins to panic, because Ukraine is many things, but in the eyes of many Germans, it's a buffer state between Germany and Russia. And as Katja Hoyer told us about 2 months ago, parts of East Germany are still traumatized by proximity to Russia, and they don't ever want to poke the bear again.
Yeah.
So those 3 big subsidies are gone. All the while, internally, the Germans are obsessing about debt and debt breaks and debt ceilings. And as those students saw, the implication of this is your trains don't run on time, your public infrastructure becomes degraded. And of course, that's all very well when the economy is flying. But if that's happening at a time when the economy is beginning to creak, when you've got a massive big migration problem, when you have an older population, that leads to extreme views. So it goes back to my idea is that not spending money when you should isn't prudent. It's actually very stupid because it allows the center to atrophy and the extremes to come through, which is precisely what's happening in Germany.
And of course, what's coming down the tracks are possible tariffs from
huge deal for
America.
Germany.
Okay, so that's the state of play at the moment. Let's have a look at the other runners and riders after a bit of this. So, Mac, Germany has called a snap election in a few months' time.
Yeah.
So we're going through the runners and
Right.
riders.
And the background noise is this obsession with balanced budgets, right?
Yeah. So who else is in the
it's a
running?
bit like, I tell you, the balance was, it's a bit like, do you remember you had that gimp suit?
I sold it, Mac.
Did you sell it?
Sold it to you.
Okay. Well, over in the corner of the basement, there is a press. And in the press, there is a gimp suit that John brings out when he's getting medieval on people. From the scene from Pulp Fiction. John is Zad, or was it Zed or Zad?
Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead.
Bring out the gimp, okay? So the gimp in this regard is the fetish that the Germans have, which we know they have a weakness for that. Anyway, they have this fetish. They have a gimp suit on about spending.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because it is like a weird fetish that it's something you do in the privacy of your own home, but you shouldn't tell anyone about it, right? So this is, again, what is determining politics. Now, the other great conservative force in Germany are the CSU, which is the Christian Social Union.
Right.
And they are largely a Bavarian offshoot of the Christian Democratic Union. So basically, it's as if the Christian Democratic Union aren't Catholic enough.
Right.
So they have more Catholic crowd from Bavaria. They used to be run by a fellow called Franz Josef Strauss, who was a big beast in German right-wing politics, a massive opponent of Helmut Kohl. They are a Bavarian party. They are exclusively Catholic, and they are largely drawn from Sudeten Germans who got kicked out of Czech Republic in 1945. So they're very nationalistic, very traditional. If you hang out there, if you go down to those parts of Germany which are really on the Austrian border, that's where these people hang out. And they are a very important bit player in the coalition. Then the big opposition party to them is the socialists, right? The SPD.
Yeah.
And the SPD are the oldest party in Germany, founded in 1875. And they became the biggest socialist party in the world before the First World War, in the Inter-Party War. They were the only, to their eternal credit, they were the only party that voted against the Enabling Act, which was the act that Hitler rammed through the parliament to give him all the rights that he subsequently used against everybody.
Yeah.
Jews, communists, socialists, gays, gypsies, everything, right? So they have credit in the bank as a German party. If you look at it.
What are they like policy-wise, though?
So they're a left-wing party. They're a left-wing party. So just if you imagine the big names who've been associated with them, was Willy Brandt was their big chancellor in the early 70s.
Oh, okay.
Helmut Schmidt was the chancellor again, later 70s. And again, Gerhard Schroeder, a 3-time chancellor, was their man, late 90s into the pre-Merkel era. So they're very much part of the left-wing establishment in Germany. But, we kind of forget that, German socialists suffered a lot under the Nazis. And I'll give you a statistic, right? Of the 15,000 German socialists who fought in the Spanish Civil War on the side of the socialists, right? Only 837 survived the Second World War.
Wow.
They shot them all.
Wow.
So, we forget that. There's a long tradition of socialism in Germany. In fact, Germany was the country that Marx thought the revolution was going to happen in because it made most sense, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So they're going big players. Schulz is their leader at the moment. There's a sense that they're not going to do very well because he's not been a great leader. But again, who knows?
Yeah,
They're a
yeah.
big force. Then you have the Greens are always a force in Germany. Always
Yeah.
a force.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
still there. They probably take a bit of a hiding, but they're still there.
I think all Greens are going to take a hiding this time round.
And exactly. And then coming up in the background, just are the extreme right and the extreme left.
Yes.
And the extreme right are your alternative for Deutschland,
Yeah.
who are a
Doing
Nazi,
really well in Eastern
yeah,
Europe.
they're a Nazi party.
Yeah.
In effect, they're a fascist party. No, I won't say they're a Nazi party. It's too loaded. They are a deeply nationalist, popular party that is anti-immigration.
Yeah.
And they believe the culture of Germany has been profoundly besmirched by the arrival of all these non-Germans.
Yeah.
And of course, their economic background is they are in East Germany, which is part of it that's grown less well. It's
Yeah.
still poor, etc., etc. And then, of course, there is the remnants of the party called Die Linke, who were the left party,
Right.
right? And they were basically the old communist party of East
Okay.
Germany.
Yeah.
And they're still around, and they now go under the bizarre name of the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance. And she is a person.
Right.
She's a politician. And she has an alliance around her of really left-wing
But these are all like independents.
ex-commies.
groups.
No, they're kind of they're the ex-members of the East German Communist Party, and they're East German Marxists in the main.
Right. Why? What's happened to Die Linke?
Die Linke they've done what all the lefties do. They have a big scrap.
Right.
They have a row,
Yeah.
right?
You go off
I
in
re-
a huff.
They go off in a terrible huff.
Yeah.
So they're the runners and riders. And the reason Germany's important, John, it's the big country.
Yes, it is the big country. So what does this mean when Germany's at the heart of Europe in the EU project? So when that gets a bit shaky, what happens to Europe? What's the implication?
We are all waiting for Germany.
Mm.
You might have seen Mario Draghi coming up with this big plan that Europe has to invest
Yes.
hundreds of billions, right?
Yeah.
That can't happen without Germany. So basically the whole of Europe is waiting for Germany to make its mind up. And Germany is a country that over the last 40 years, we know has had difficulty making its mind up. It has difficulty making hard decisions. And it is a country that has kind of lost its way. And one of the reasons is Europe wants Germany to lead on one area,
Yeah.
but also doesn't really trust Germany to lead in another area, right? Because culturally, there's the Second World War always in the background, right?
Yeah.
And the Germans themselves don't want to lead because they don't want to be the leaders that are responsible. So there's always in the German psyche a lack of taking responsibility for your economic size.
Is this good news or bad news for the likes of Macron in France or Meloni in Italy?
Well, Macron is very, very much a believer in the Franco-German alliance, the Paris-Berlin axis as being the central dynamo of European integration. But European integration is stalled because nobody wants it. And it's much more likely that people like Meloni are being elected and she's against European integration.
Yeah.
Her big idea is basically Italy should be sovereign, should be less involved in Europe, and nationalism always trumps internationalism. And typically what always happened was we had a German leader like Angela Merkel or Helmut Kohl or even Gerhard Schröder, right? That had at least the sense of somebody who was leading Europe, if not in reality, in actual practice behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
And that's not happening now. Germany has lost its way. And it's lost its way because it's lost its economic mojo. I think...
And therefore, EU has lost its way.
Yes, I think what happens is in Germany, and again, it's a country I go to a lot, and I have lots of German mates, and I try to keep abreast of what's going on there. The economic might of the former West Germany and then the subsequent unified Germany was always the insurance policy that Germans had, which is as long as the economy is growing and we have these brilliant industrial trademarks like Mercedes and BMW, right? That is enough. We can lead Europe by generating enough money, by throwing money into the European budget, and basically we've done our job.
Yeah.
We don't have to take any difficult decisions when it comes to Russia, when it comes to America, when it comes to NATO, all that stuff. That's now over. So if Germany doesn't lead, Europe goes backwards.